I never thought I'd have to face my own son in court, with his wife smirking beside him, as the bailiff called our names. Case number 47392, Evelyn Richardson versus Kyle and Megan Richardson. Property dispute. My hands trembled as I clutched my leather purse, the same one my late husband, Robert, had given me for our 30th anniversary. 3 years ago, I'd welcomed Megan into our family with open arms. Now she wanted to take the home I'd spent 47 years building. Hand over the keys today, she'd demanded just 2 weeks earlier, standing in my kitchen with her manicured finger jabbing toward my face. But she didn't know about the document, the one that made the judge's eyes widen when he read it, the one that finally made her speechless. I should probably back up and explain how we got here. My name is Evelyn, and until 3 years ago, I thought I had the perfect relationship with my son Kyle. He was always my sensitive child, the one who brought me wildflowers from the yard and later, as a teenager, would sit with me on the porch swing discussing his dreams while his brothers were off playing sports. When Robert, my husband of 42 years, passed away from heart failure in 2021, Kyle was the one who stayed at the house with me for those first terrible weeks. He'd help me sort through Robert's clothes, gently asking if I was ready to donate them, never pushing when I said I needed more time. "This is your house, Mom," he'd say. "Everything happens on your schedule." Little did I know those words would come back to haunt us both. Kyle met Megan at a friend's wedding, about 6 months after Robert passed. I remember the day he brought her home to meet me. She arrived with a small potted orchid and complimented my colonial-style home, with its wraparound porch and the garden Robert and I had tended together for decades. "What a lovely place," she said, running her hand along the hand-carved banister my husband had installed himself. "So much character. They just don't build homes like this anymore." I was touched by her appreciation for our family home. Kyle beamed beside her, and I thought to myself that perhaps this woman would be good for him, so on, to help him move forward while respecting our family's past. How wrong I was. The wedding came quickly, maybe too quickly in retrospect. Just 8 months after they met, Kyle proposed, and 3 months later, they had a small ceremony in my backyard. I remember Megan talking about how perfect the setting was, how she loved the idea of starting their marriage in a place with such history and love. During the reception, she pulled me aside and hugged me tightly. "I'm so grateful to be part of your family, Evelyn," she whispered. "Kyle told me how hard these past years have been for you. I want you to know that you'll never be alone." I actually cried, touched by what seemed like genuine care from my new daughter. If only I'd recognized the calculation behind those words. The first few months after the wedding were pleasant enough. They lived in Kyle's downtown apartment, but visited every Sunday for dinner. Kyle would help me with household repairs, while Megan and I cooked together or worked in the garden. She asked questions about family recipes and the stories behind various heirlooms in the house. I answered eagerly, happy to share these memories with someone who seemed interested in preserving them. "This serving dish belonged to Robert's grandmother," I'd explain, "and this rocking chair came across the country with my great-grandparents in 1903. She'd nod appreciatively, touching each item with reverence. Now I realized she was probably mentally calculating their value all along. Things began to change when Kyle mentioned they were looking to buy a house. "The market was brutal," he explained, "with prices soaring beyond what they could afford on his teacher's salary and her administrative job. We're saving," he assured me, "but at this rate, it might take years before we can afford something half the size of a starter home." I sympathized with theirs, remembered how Robert and I had scrimped and saved for years to afford our first tiny apartment. One evening over dinner, I made what I now recognize as the first step toward disaster. "You know," I said, "your father and I always planned for this house to be yours someday, Kyle. It's too big for just me. Maybe you two should consider moving in here with me." The words had barely left my mouth when I saw the look that passed between them, a flash of something I couldn't quite identify. Excitement, relief, or something more calculating. But Kyle quickly masked whatever it was with a show of concern. "Mom, we couldn't possibly. This is your home. We'd never want to intrude on your space." But Megan was already sitting up straighter, her eyes scanning the dining room with new interest. "Unless," she said slowly, "you were already considering downsizing. A place this size must be a lot for one person to maintain." There was something in her tone, a leading quality, that made me hesitate. But Kyle jumped in before I could respond. "Mom's not going anywhere, Megan. This house has been in our family for generations, right? Mom, I nodded, but the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Megan brought up the subject with increasing frequency. I saw the cutest condo community for seniors, she'd mention casually. Or, my client's mother just moved to Sunshine Acres, she says. It's like being on vacation every day. Each comment was delivered with a smile. But I began to feel an underlying pressure. Then came the articles about aging in place left on my coffee table. The brochures for retirement communities that appeared in my mail. When I confronted Kyle, he seemed genuinely surprised. Megan's just looking out for your future. Mom, we worry about you being alone in this big house, especially with those stairs. About 6 months after their wedding, they broached the subject directly. Over Sunday dinner, Kyle cleared his throat and said they had a proposal for me. Mom, we've been thinking a lot about your suggestion that we move in here. My heart lifted momentarily. This was what I'd wanted. After all, family close by, the house full of life again. But then Megan continued, but we're concerned about you navigating these stairs as you get older, and the upkeep of such a large property. She reached across the table and took my hand in what seemed like a gesture of concern. We think the perfect solution would be for you to sign the house over to us now, as an early inheritance. You could move into Willow Creek. It's that lovely senior community I told you about, and we would take care of all the maintenance here. The house stays in the family, and you get to enjoy your retirement without worries. The shock must have shown on my face because Kyle quickly added, of course, we'd cover the costs of the move and help set up your new place, and you could visit any time. Visit, the word hung in the air between us. Visit the home I'd built with my husband. Visit the garden, where we'd scattered some of Robert's ashes. Visit the kitchen where I'd taught my sons to bake their father's favorite cookies. I felt a chill run through me despite the warm spring evening. I don't think I'm ready for that kind of change, I stammered. Megan's smile tightened just slightly. Well, think about it, Evelyn. No rush. We just want what's best for everyone. But there was a rush, as it turned out. The visits became more frequent, and with each one, there was a new comment about the house. These gutters really need cleaning. Mom, that's dangerous for you to attempt. Or, this plumbing is so outdated. It's going to cause major problems soon. Each observation was delivered with concern, but the subtext was clear. You can't handle this place anymore. Meanwhile, they began bringing boxers when they visited. Just some things we're storing temporarily, Kyle explained when I asked. But I noticed they were filling the spare bedroom, then part of the basement, gradually staking their claim. The real turning point came during a dinner with my other sons and their families. Thomas and Michael had come with their wives and children, a rare gathering with everyone's busy schedules. Megan had insisted on hosting at our family home, as she now called it. I noticed she'd rearranged some furniture without asking and had replaced family photos with her own decorative items. When I mentioned it privately, she waved away my concern. Just freshening things up a bit, Evelyn. This place could use a woman's touch again. The phrasing stung as if my decades of homemaking counted for nothing. During dinner, she clinked her glass for attention and announced, Kyle and I have some news. We've been talking with Evelyn, and she's agreed to let us take over the family home while she moves to Willow Creek Senior Living. We're so grateful for her generosity. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. I hadn't agreed to anything of the sort. Before I could speak, Thomas's wife, Julie, asked, Mom, is this what you want? I opened my mouth to deny it, but Kyle interjected. Mom's been struggling with the decision, but she knows it's for the best. Right, Mom? His eyes pleaded with me not to contradict them in front of everyone. Confused and blindsided, I merely nodded, then excused myself to the kitchen. Julie followed me. You don't seem happy about this, Evelyn, she said quietly. Is this really your choice? Tears welled in my eyes, and I confessed that I felt pressured but didn't want to cause family conflict. Julie hugged me tightly. Don't sign anything, she whispered. Promise me. The next day, I received a call from a real estate agent who said she was coming by to assess the property before the transfer. When I told her there must be a mistake, she seemed confused. I have paperwork here authorized by Kyle Richardson regarding the property at 1842 Maple Avenue. He said his mother, that's you, correct, was transferring ownership and moving to assisted living. My hands began to shake so badly I had to sit down. They were already making arrangements, acting as if my consent was a mere formality. When I called Kyle, it went to voicemail. Instead, Megan called back an hour later. Kyle told me about your confusion with the realtor. she said smoothly. Don't worry about it, we're just getting preliminary information. But we should really get the paperwork started on the transfer. Why don't we come by tomorrow with some documents for you to sign? That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the halls of the home Robert and I had lovingly maintained for decades, trailing my fingers along the walls as if to reassure myself they were still mine. In our bedroom, still ours in my mind. Never, just me and I opened Robert's nightstand and took out the leather journal he'd kept. If anything happens to me, he'd said years ago, everything you need to know is in here. I'd looked through it after his death, noting insurance policies, account numbers, his wishes for his funeral, but I hadn't read it cover to cover, too painful to see his handwriting stretching across the pages. Now, seeking comfort and perhaps guidance, I began to read more thoroughly, and there, dated just 3 months before his heart attack, was an entry that made my breath catch. Spoke with Edward today about the house. Papers are signed and filed. Evelyn doesn't know yet, want to surprise her for our anniversary. After all these years, it's finally done right. Edward was our attorney, a family friend who had handled Robert's will. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone and, despite the late hour, dialed his number. Edward, I'm sorry to call so late, but it's important, I said when he answered, concern evident in his voice. Robert's journal mentions papers about the house that you helped him with. What was he referring to? Edward was silent for a moment. He never told you, he finally asked. Evelyn, Robert put the house in a trust. It's complicated legal language, but essentially, you have lifetime rights to live there. The house can't be sold or transferred without your consent while you're alive. And even then, there are stipulations about how it would be divided among your children, not just Kyle. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by anger at my son and his wife. I need copies of those documents immediately, I said. And Edward, I may need your professional services very soon. The next day, Kyle and Megan arrived with a folder of papers and determinedly cheerful attitudes. We brought lunch, Megan announced, holding up a bag from my favorite deli. The calculated thoughtfulness made my stomach turn. They made small talk as we ate, carefully avoiding the real reason for their visit until the plates were cleared. Then Kyle pulled out the folder. So, Mom, we've had the paperwork drawn up to make the transfer as simple as possible for you. He slid a document across the table. This transfers the deed to us, and this one confirms your residency at Willow Creek. They're holding a unit for you, but we need to move quickly. His tone was gentle but firm, as if speaking to a child who needed guidance. I didn't touch the papers. Instead, I looked my son in the eye and said quietly, I spoke with Edward Harrington last night. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Kyle's face. Dad's attorney. What for? I took a deep breath. Robert put this house in a trust before he died. I have lifetime rights to live here. The house cannot be transferred or sold without my consent. Megan's smile froze on her face. That can't be right, she said sharply. We reviewed the property records. The house is in your name, Evelyn. I nodded slowly. Yes, it is. But there's a trust document filed with the county that supersedes any simple transfer. Edward is bringing me copies this afternoon. Kyle's face had gone pale. Mom, we were just trying to help organize things. If you're not ready, stop it, Kyle, I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in months. You and Megan have been pressuring me to leave my home for your benefit, not mine. You've rearranged my belongings, made plans without my consent, and even announced decisions I never agreed to in front of our entire family. That stops today. Megan's expression hardened. We've only ever had your best interests at heart. Evelyn, this house is too much for you. You've been forgetting things, leaving burners on. I cut her off again. That happened once, Megan, after I took the new medication that made me dizzy. Don't exaggerate to manipulate me. Kyle stood up abruptly. I think we all need to calm down. We'll talk about this when everyone's thinking more clearly. They left shortly after, the folder of papers still on my table, my signature nowhere on them. Edward arrived later with the trust documents, explaining everything in detail. Robert had indeed set up an irrevocable trust that protected my right to the house for my lifetime. He was concerned about exactly this scenario, Edward admitted. He worried that after he was gone, you might be vulnerable to pressure, even from family. The validation that Robert had anticipated and moved to prevent this very situation brought tears to my eyes. What should I do now? I asked. Edward adjusted his glasses. That depends on what you want, Evelyn. If you want to stay in your home, these documents protect that right. If Kyle and Megan continue to pressure you, we have legal recourse. He paused. But these are serious steps to take against your own son. That evening, Julie called to check on me. When I told her what I'd discovered and the confrontation with Kyle and Megan, she wasn't surprised. Thomas and I wondered if something like this was happening. They've been talking about taking over the family home for months now. My heart sank. This had been their plan all along, not a recent development. Julie offered to come stay with me for a few days, which I gratefully accepted. Having another person in the house made me feel safer, especially when Kyle began calling repeatedly, then showing up unannounced. "Mom, we need to talk about this," he insisted when Julie answered the door. "There's been a misunderstanding." Julie stood firm. "Evelyn needs some space. Kyle, she'll call when she's ready to talk." He left reluctantly, but the text messages continued. "We only wanted what's best for you. The trust can be challenged. Please don't let legal documents come between family." With Julie's support and Edward's guidance, I began to document everything: the pressure tactics, the unauthorized rearranging of my home, the announcements made without my consent. I found receipts for furniture they'd purchased for the house, and emails Kyle had sent to contractors about renovations they planned to make. Most disturbing was an email Megan had written to Willow Creek, inquiring about their policy on residents with mild cognitive issues, clearly laying groundwork to suggest I was mentally unfit if I resisted their plans. When I showed these to Edward, his expression grew grave. "Evelyn, they're building a case to challenge your competency. We need to be proactive here." On Edward's advice, I underwent a comprehensive cognitive assessment with a geriatric specialist, who found me to be exceptionally sharp and fully competent to manage personal and financial affairs. I updated my will with Edward's help, making it clear that while the house would eventually be divided equally among my 3 sons, any attempt to remove me from it during my lifetime would result in the challenging party's share being donated to charity instead. I installed security cameras after finding Kyle in my house one day when I'd returned from grocery shopping. "I still have a key, Mom," he said defensively. "I was just checking on things." That same day, I had the locks changed and explicitly told him not to enter without permission again. Matters came to a head when I received a certified letter informing me that Kyle and Megan had filed a petition questioning my competency and requesting guardianship over me and my assets. The grounds cited included observed memory issues, unsafe living conditions, and paranoid behavior, including installing surveillance cameras and changing locks to keep family out. I felt physically ill reading the document. Seeing my son's signature below these false claims, Edward wasn't surprised. "This is unfortunately common when family members want control of property. But we're prepared, Evelyn. Your medical evaluation, the documentation of their behavior, and the trust Robert set up, we have a strong case." The weeks leading up to the court date were some of the most stressful of my life. Kyle and Megan launched a campaign within the family, telling relatives I was becoming paranoid and confused, that they were only trying to ensure my safety. Some believed them. Kyle had always been charismatic and convincing, but Thomas and Michael stood by me, especially after seeing the evidence I'd gathered. Thomas even testified in a deposition about the dinner where Megan had announced my decision to move. Friends and neighbors provided statements about my active lifestyle and sharp mind. My doctor submitted his recent evaluation confirming my cognitive health. Still, the uncertainty was agonizing. These were legal protections, yes, but this was also my son, my Kyle, trying to declare me incompetent and take my home. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a blue suit I'd worn to professional functions when I still worked as a school administrator. I wanted to look composed and capable. Julie drove me to the courthouse, where we met Edward. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I saw Kyle and Megan with their attorney, heads bent in conversation. Kyle looked up and our eyes met. For a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face, maybe even shame. But Megan whispered something to him, and his expression hardened again. They didn't approach me, and I was grateful. I wasn't sure I could speak to them without breaking down. Inside the courtroom, their attorney presented their case first, painting a picture of a declining widow who needed protection from herself. "Mrs. Richardson has been observed forgetting important appointments, leaving appliances on, and displaying increasing paranoia about family members' intentions," he claimed. "My clients Her son and daughter have only tried to ensure her safety by suggesting a more appropriate living arrangement, which she initially agreed to before becoming hostile and accusatory, presented statements from distant relatives who had seen me infrequently since Robert's death, and one from a handyman who claimed I seemed confused about repairs he'd completed. I later discovered Kyle had arranged without my knowledge. When it was Edward's turn, he methodically dismantled their case. He presented my recent medical evaluations, statements from friends who saw me regularly, and evidence of my continued community involvement. Mrs. Richardson is not only competent but thriving independently, he stated. What we have here is not a concerned son but an attempted property grab, well documented through emails, witness statements, and the petitioner's own actions. Then came the moment that changed everything. Edward introduced Robert's trust documents, which clearly protected my right to remain in the home for life. Your Honor, the petitioners were aware of this trust when they began pressuring Mrs. Richardson to leave. In fact, their petition was filed just 2 weeks after Mrs. Richardson reminded them of its existence. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, studied the documents carefully, her expression growing increasingly troubled. She asked several pointed questions about the timeline of events and Kyle and Megan's actions after learning about the trust. Their attorney attempted to argue that the trust could be challenged due to my diminished capacity, but the judge cut him off. The medical evidence presented shows no such diminishment, she said firmly. Then she addressed Kyle directly. Mr. Richardson, did you understand the terms of this trust when you began encouraging your mother to transfer the property to you? Kyle shifted uncomfortably. We thought it was in her best interest to move somewhere smaller. Your Honor, the trust doesn't change that. The judge's eyes narrowed. That doesn't answer my question. Were you aware that this trust prevented any transfer of the property without your mother's explicit consent? Kyle hesitated, then admitted, yes, we knew about it, but we thought Mom would agree once she understood the benefits of moving. The judge turned to Megan and Mrs. Richardson. Can you explain these emails discussing Mrs. Evelyn Richardson's supposed cognitive issues with Willow Creek, dated 3 months before you claimed to have observed any concerning behavior? Megan's confident demeanor cracked. She looked down at her hands, then at her attorney, who nodded slightly. We were preparing for eventualities, she said weakly. We could see signs before others might notice. The judge's expression made it clear she didn't believe this explanation. After both sides presented their cases, the judge delivered her ruling immediately. Unusual for such hearings, I find no evidence whatsoever supporting the need for guardianship over Evelyn Richardson. On the contrary, the evidence suggests this petition was filed in bad faith, as part of an effort to circumvent a legally binding trust and pressure a competent individual out of her rightful home. She looked directly at Kyle and Megan. I'm dismissing this petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Kyle and Megan Richardson from entering Evelyn Richardson's property without written permission or attempting to contact financial or medical entities on her behalf. She turned to me with a softer expression. Mrs. Richardson, your late husband's foresight has protected your interests today, as I'm sure he intended. I couldn't hold back tears as the judge's words sank in. Beside me, Edward squeezed my hand in victory, while behind me, I heard Thomas and Julie's sighs of relief. Across the courtroom, Megan's face had gone rigid with shock and anger. She whispered furiously to their attorney, while Kyle sat motionless, staring at the table in front of him. As we stood to leave, Kyle finally looked up and our eyes met again. This time, I saw something that might have been regret in his expression, but it was too late for simple apologies. They had tried to declare me incompetent, to strip me of my autonomy in my home. Trust, once shattered so completely, couldn't be repaired with a look. In the hallway outside, Kyle approached as Edward and my family formed a protective circle around me. Mom, please, he began, but Thomas stepped between us. Not now, Kyle. Haven't you done enough? Megan pulled at Kyle's arm. Come on, it's not worth it. We'll appeal. Her voice carried clearly in the corridor. This isn't over. Edward turned to them calmly. Actually, Mrs. Richardson, it is over. Any appeal would face the same evidence and likely result in additional sanctions. I suggest you accept the judge's ruling and respect Mrs. Evelyn's boundaries going forward. Megan glared at me over Edward's shoulder. You won't live forever, Evelyn, she said coldly, and neither will that trust protect you forever. As they walked away, I felt a strange mixture of grief for the son I had lost and relief that the truth had finally been exposed. The weeks after the hearing were quiet. Kyle called once, leaving a voicemail that sounded rehearsed, offering a vague apology for any misunderstandings without acknowledging what he and Megan had tried to do. I didn't call back. Instead, I focused on reclaiming my home and my life. I returned the furniture they had rearranged to its original positions. I replanted sections of the garden Megan had cleared for her planned renovations. Each small act of restoration helped heal something inside me. Julie, Thomas, and Michael took turns visiting, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with laughter again. Slowly, the shadow that had hung over my home began to lift. About a month after the court hearing, I received a letter from Kyle, not an email or text, but a handwritten letter on actual stationery. It was 3 pages long, and unlike the voicemail, it held no excuses. I betrayed your trust and the values you and Dad raised me with, he wrote. Megan and I are separating. I've been seeing a therapist to understand how I could have gone along with something so wrong. He didn't ask for forgiveness or for me to respond. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what I did, and I'm trying to be better. I read the letter several times, emotions swirling, anger, sadness, a tiny seed of hope that perhaps my son wasn't entirely lost to me. I put the letter in Robert's journal but didn't respond immediately. Some wounds need time. With the legal threats behind me, I decided it was time to truly embrace this chapter of my life. I joined a gardening club and a book group, finding community with other women my age. I took a watercolor class, something I'd always wanted to try but never found time for during my working years. On Edward's advice, I created a comprehensive estate plan that not only honored Robert's wishes, but also protected my own. The house would remain in trust, eventually passing to all 3 sons equally, with provisions for my grandchildren. But my personal belongings, the heirlooms, the photo albums, the small treasures that held our family history, those I cataloged and assigned with care. 6 months after the court case, Kyle reached out again, asking if we could meet in a public plaza coffee shop I frequented. I agreed, with Thomas's knowledge and support. Kyle arrived early, visibly nervous, with dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know if you would." I studied my son's face, seeing both the man he had become and the boy he had been. "I almost didn't," I admitted. He nodded, accepting this. We talked for an hour, carefully at first, then more openly. He told me that Megan had moved out of state after their divorce was finalized. She had a plan all along, he said quietly. She'd done this before, targeted someone with assets, used their family to gain access. I was blind to it because I wanted to believe in us. I didn't offer absolution, but I did listen, and when we parted, I agreed to another meeting the following month. Rebuilding trust with Kyle is a slow process, one I approach with caution. We meet regularly now, always in public places, occasionally joined by his brothers. He's moved to an apartment across town and started volunteering at a youth center. Finding his way back to the compassionate person I raised. I don't know if our relationship will ever fully heal. Some betrayals leave permanent scars, but I'm willing to give him the chance to try. As for the house, it remains my sanctuary. I've updated my will to ensure that Kyle's share of the eventual inheritance is placed in a controlled trust, protecting both his interests and honoring Robert's wishes. Looking back now, I recognize that what happened with Kyle and Megan was never really about the house itself. It was about power, control, and the vulnerability they perceived in me after Robert's death. They saw me as diminished without my husband, an easy target for manipulation. What they failed to understand was that 50 years of building a life with someone doesn't leave you weaker when they're gone. In many ways, it makes you stronger. You carry that person with you in every decision, every value, every boundary you set. Robert protected me through his foresight with the trust, yes, but I protected myself too, by refusing to be bullied out of the life and home I'd earned. If there's one thing I've learned from this ordeal, it's that aging doesn't mean surrendering your autonomy or wisdom. The same woman who raised children, built a career, and partnered in a decades-long marriage doesn't suddenly become incapable of managing her own affairs because there are more candles on her birthday cake. I know now to be vigilant about legal protections, to document important conversations, and to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, even when it comes from family. Most importantly, I've learned the strength of my own voice. When I finally said no, clearly and firmly, everything changed. Sometimes, On quiet evenings, I sit in Robert's chair on our porch, watching the sunset over the garden we planted together. I imagine telling him this story, how his careful planning saved our home, how I found the courage to stand up for myself, how even in his absence, our partnership continued. I think he would be proud, not just of the outcome, but of the way I refused to be made small by those who underestimated me. In the end, that's what this story is really about. Not just keeping my house, but keeping my dignity, my agency, my voice, as I write this from that same porch. With summer flowers blooming in the beds Robert and I designed together, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt pressured by family to do something that didn't feel right? Have you noticed how people sometimes speak to older relatives as if age automatically diminishes capacity? Take a moment to reflect on that. And if you know someone who's facing similar pressure, whether it's about their home, their finances, or their independence, share my story with them. Let them know they're not alone, and that standing firm isn't selfish. It's If my experience helps even one person recognize manipulation before it goes too far, then some good has come from these difficult years. Remember, documents matter, boundaries matter, and most importantly, your right to determine your own future matters. At 25, 55, or 8, no one can take that from you unless you let them. There's something I haven't shared yet, something that happened just 3 months after the court hearing that shows how deeply this experience affected everyone in our family. Thomas called me one evening, his voice unusually hesitant. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Kyle," he said. My heart immediately clenched. Despite our cautious reconciliation attempts, things remained fragile between Kyle and me. "What's happened?" I asked, steeling myself for bad news. Thomas sighed. "He came to see me yesterday. He was a mess, Mom. He broke down completely, showed me all these old family photos he's been carrying around. He said he's been having nightmares about the court hearing, about the look on your face when the judge read those trust papers." I closed my eyes, the memory still vivid, the mixture of vindication and heartbreak as my own son was exposed in his deception. "What did you tell him?" I asked softly. "I told him the truth," Thomas replied, "that actions have consequences, and rebuilding trust takes time. But I also told him something Dad used to say, remember, the Richardson family bends but never breaks." Tears sprang to my eyes at the familiar phrase. Robert had said it countless times during difficult moments, financial struggles, health scares, arguments between the boys. It was our family motto, in a way. Kyle asked if he could come to Sunday dinner next week, Thomas continued, with Michael and Julie and the kids, not to push anything, just to be present. I told him I'd ask you. I sat with that request for a full day before calling Thomas back. Part of me wanted to refuse to protect the fragile peace I'd established, but another part remembered Kyle as a small boy, sitting beside me on the porch swing, his head against my shoulder as we watched fireflies emerge at dusk. "He can come," I finally decided. "But Thomas, you stay close. I'm not ready to be alone with him yet." Thomas understood. "We'll all be there, Mom." Every minute. That Sunday dinner was one of the most uncomfortable meals of my life. Kyle arrived last, bearing a potted herb garden rather than cut flowers. He remembered I always preferred living plants. He'd lost weight, and the confident swagger that had become his hallmark during his marriage to Megan was gone. He spoke little during dinner, mostly answering direct questions from his brothers about his new job teaching history at the local community college. The children, sensing tension, were unusually subdued. It wasn't until dessert, Robert's favorite apple pie that I'd baked from his mother's recipe, that Kyle finally looked directly at me. "This tastes exactly the same," he said quietly. "Exactly like when Dad was here." There was a catch in his voice that took me back to when he was 13 and trying so hard not to cry after a baseball game loss. "Some recipes shouldn't change," I replied, my own voice steadier than I felt. Kyle nodded, then set down his fork with deliberate care. "Mom, I know one dinner doesn't fix anything. I know you might never fully trust me again. But I want you to know that I'm getting counseling to understand how I let Megan manipulate me into betraying our family's values. I'm not asking for forgiveness, yet I haven't earned it. I just want a chance to be your son again. Somehow, someday." The table had gone silent, everyone frozen in the moment. I studied Kyle's face, looking for any trace of the calculation I'd seen during those terrible months. Instead, I saw only raw pain and genuine remorse. "Your father believed that people can change if they truly want to," I said finally. "I'm not there yet, Kyle, but I'm willing to see if he was right." It wasn't forgiveness, we both knew that, but it was a door left slightly ajar instead of firmly closed. When Kyle left that night, he didn't try to hug me as he once would have. Instead, he paused at the door and said simply, "Thank you for dinner, Mom. The house feels like home again." It was the first time I'd cried in front of him since the ordeal began. These Sunday dinners became a tentative new tradition. At first, Kyle was always accompanied by Thomas or Michael, never alone with me. But gradually, as weeks turned to months, the awkwardness began to fade. Sometimes he'd arrive early to help me prepare, telling me about his students or asking about the garden. We developed a careful choreography of rebuilding, never mentioning Megan directly, focusing instead on the present, on small, shared moments. One evening, he asked if he could look through the family photo albums. I found him in the living room an hour later, staring at a picture of himself at 10. Sitting on Robert's shoulders at a baseball game. "I've been trying to remember who I was before all this," he said without looking up. "Who Dad raised me to be." 6 months after our first stilted dinner, Kyle asked if he could help me with the backyard shed that had been damaged in a storm. It was the kind of project he and Robert used to tackle together, and I recognized the request for what it was, an attempt to reconnect with not just me, but the memory of his father. We spent a weekend working side by side, mostly in companionable silence. As we finished on Sunday afternoon, Kyle ran his hand along the repaired wall and said, "Dad would have done it better." I shook my head. No, he would have done it differently. "This is good work, Kyle." It was the first genuine compliment I'd given him in over a year, and the surprise in his eyes told me he recognized its significance. The true turning point came, unexpectedly, through one of my grandchildren. Lisa, Michael's 10-year-old daughter, was staying with me for a weekend while her parents attended a wedding. Kyle stopped by with ice cream, a peace offering of sorts that had become his custom. Lisa, who had watched the family drama unfold with the child's keen perception, suddenly asked, during dessert, "Uncle Kyle, why did you try to take Grandma's house away?" The bluntness of the question left us both speechless. Kyle set down his spoon, his face flushing with shame. I started to intervene, to protect him from having to answer, but he shook his head slightly. "Because I made a terrible mistake, Lisa," he said, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "I let someone convince me that what I wanted was more important than what was right. It's the worst thing I've ever done, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Lisa considered this with the straightforward logic of childhood. "But why did you want Grandma's house? You don't even have kids to fill all the rooms." Kyle smiled sadly. "That's a really good question. I think I wanted to possess something special, something that had history. I was jealous that this house would eventually be shared among all of us brothers, not just mine." Megan encouraged that jealousy until it grew into something ugly. He looked at me then, but what I didn't understand was that the house isn't just walls and rooms. It's the memories inside it, the love that built it, and those things can't be taken or transferred with a signature on a paper. Lisa nodded, apparently satisfied, and asked for more ice cream, but I sat frozen, realizing this was the most honest conversation Kyle and I had had since everything fell apart. That night, after Lisa was asleep and Kyle was preparing to leave, I stopped him at the door. "What you said to Lisa today about the house being more than walls and rooms, your father used to say almost exactly the same thing." Kyle's eyes widened slightly. "I didn't know that." I nodded, feeling something shift between us. "There's a lot of him in you, Kyle. There always has been. That's what made your actions so incomprehensible to me." He looked down, hands shoved in his pockets like he used to do as a teenager when in trouble. "I lost myself for a while, Mom. But I'm finding my way back, not just to who I was, but to who I should be." I didn't embrace him. We weren't there yet, but I did reach out and squeeze his arm briefly. "Keep finding your way," I said simply. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement of his journey. And for now, that was enough. As the 1-year anniversary of the court hearing approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. The pain had dulled somewhat, transformed from an acute agony to a chronic ache that flared occasionally but no longer dominated my days. Kyle and I had established a new kind of relationship, more cautious than before, with clear boundaries, but genuine in its own way. He never asked to move back into the family home, never again suggested I should leave. Instead, he helped maintain it from a respectful distance, honoring it as my space while accepting his connection to its history. "Megan, I heard through family whispers, had moved to Arizona and was already engaged to a widower with significant real estate holdings. I felt a momentary surge of protectiveness for this unknown man, wondering if I should somehow warn him. But Edward, ever practical, reminded me, "You have no legal obligation there, Evelyn, and sometimes people need to learn their own lessons." Still, I lit a candle for the stranger, hoping he might see what Kyle hadn't before it was too late. On the anniversary itself, I decided to host a different kind of gathering, not just family, but the friends and neighbors who had stood by me during the ordeal. It wasn't a celebration exactly, more a commemoration of resilience. As my guests mingled in the garden Robert had designed, I found myself alongside Mrs. Abernathy, my neighbor of 30 years who had provided a key statement about my competence for the court. "I always wondered," she said, sipping her lemonade, "what was in that document that changed everything, the one the judge read that day." I hadn't shared the details widely, preferring to keep that private. But now, a year later, it felt important to acknowledge Robert's foresight. "Robert set up a trust," I explained. "Not just a simple will, but a living trust with specific provisions about the house. He specified that I had lifetime rights to live here, regardless of any pressure from family members. He even included language about how any attempt to force me out would result in the challenging party losing their inheritance share entirely." Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows rose. "He anticipated this exact scenario." I nodded, still marveling at it myself. "Edward says he was quite specific about his concerns that without him, someone might see me as vulnerable and try to take advantage. He created an ironclad legal shield that they couldn't break through." Mrs. Abernathy glanced across the garden where Kyle was helping Thomas's son set up a badminton net. "And yet you've allowed him back into your life," she observed. It wasn't a criticism, merely an observation. I watched my son thinner now, more subdued, but laughing genuinely as he worked with his nephew. "Robert protected the house," I said slowly, "but I think he would have wanted me to protect the family too, if possible. Not by forgetting, but by allowing space for redemption." She nodded thoughtfully. "It's a fine line to walk, forgiveness without foolishness." I smiled at her succinct assessment. "Exactly. I'm keeping my heart open but my eyes clear, and the new keys stay with me alone." That evening, as guests departed and the family helped clean up, Kyle lingered until everyone else had gone. He seemed nervous, shifting his weight as he stood in the kitchen doorway. "Mom, I have something for you," he said finally, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "It's not a gift exactly, more of a ... commitment." Inside was a notarized document, drawn up with legal precision. As I read it, my hands began to tremble slightly. It was a personal affidavit, voluntarily surrendering any claim to challenge the trust Robert had established, acknowledging my absolute right to the house for my lifetime, and waiving his right to contest any decisions I might make about the property in the future. "You didn't have to do this," I said, looking up from the paper. "The trust is already legally binding." Kyle nodded. "I know. This isn't about legal protection. It's about showing you that I understand and respect your boundaries now. It's something concrete to demonstrate that I've changed." The gesture touched me deeply, not just the document itself, but the recognition behind it. He wasn't asking for my trust back. He was acknowledging that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt with actions, not just words. I carefully folded the paper and placed it in the drawer with Robert's journal and trust documents. "Thank you," I said simply. Kyle nodded, understanding that while this didn't erase the past, it was a meaningful step forward. As the seasons changed and another year began to unfold, I found myself settling into a new rhythm of life. The garden bloomed with perennials Robert and I had planted decades ago, alongside new varieties I was experimenting with. I joined a memoir writing group at the local library, finding unexpected joy in sharing pieces of my story with others my age who had weathered their own storms. Some days, I wrote about Robert and our life together. Other days, I found myself exploring the painful chapter with Kyle and Megan, discovering that putting it on paper somehow helped me process it more fully. One particularly significant moment came when I was invited to speak at a senior center about elder rights and financial protection. Edward had suggested it after hearing about a similar case in our county. Standing before a room of my peers, I shared my experience not as a victim, but as someone who had successfully defended her autonomy. "The most important thing I learned," I told them, "was to trust my instincts. If something feels wrong, even when it comes from family, listen to that feeling." After my talk, a line of people formed to speak with me privately. many sharing similar experiences or concerns. One woman, her hands twisted with arthritis but her eyes sharp, whispered, "My daughter says I can't manage alone anymore, but I think she just wants my condo on the beach." I gave her Edward's card and squeezed her hands gently. "Get everything in writing," I advised. "And remember, needing help sometimes doesn't mean surrendering control." That presentation led to others, and gradually I found myself becoming something of an advocate in our community. I worked with Edward to organize workshops on estate planning and elder rights. Kyle attended one of these sessions, sitting quietly in the back row. Afterwards, he approached with an unexpected request. "Would you be willing to let me record an interview with you about your experience?" he asked. "For my students, we're covering elder law in our civic responsibility unit. And your story is ... powerful." I hesitated, uncertain about being so vulnerable on camera. "I'd edit it however you wanted," he added quickly. "Nothing you're not comfortable sharing." Something about his earnestness reminded me of the boy who had wanted to make everything right before Megan entered our lives. "Send me the questions first," I agreed, "and we'll see." The interview, when we finally recorded it, became something neither of us had anticipated, a healing conversation that bridged some of the remaining distance between us. With the camera rolling in my living room, Kyle asked thoughtful questions about warning signs I'd noticed, protections I wished I'd had in place earlier, and the emotional impact of having family members attempt to declare me incompetent. When he asked about forgiveness, whether it was possible after such a profound breach of trust, he paused, considering my answer carefully. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment," I said finally. "It's a process, with steps forward and sometimes steps back. There's forgiveness that wipes the slate clean, erasing the past completely, that's rare and usually unwise. Then there's forgiveness that acknowledges the harm done but chooses to move forward anyway, eyes open. That's the harder kind, but often the more honest." Kyle nodded, his professional interviewer's demeanor slipping for a moment. "And which kind are we working toward?" he asked softly, the question clearly personal despite the camera. I met his gaze steadily. "The second kind. I'm not forgetting, Kyle, but I am choosing to see who you're becoming now, not just who you were then." After he turned off the camera, we sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything said and unsaid filling the room. "Thank you," he said finally, "not just for the interview, for giving me any chance at all." I reached over and took his hand, the first time I'd initiated physical contact since before the court case. "Your father always said you had the strongest moral compass of all the boys, even as a child," I told him. "That's why your actions hurt so deeply. They went against your own nature, but that compass is still there. Kyle, I see it working again." He held onto my hand tightly, tears in his eyes, and in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, not complete healing, but a genuine step toward it. The edited interview, when Kyle showed it to me, was respectful and educational. He had focused on the practical aspects of my experience, the importance of proper legal documents, the warning signs of financial manipulation, the resources available to seniors facing similar situations, but he had also included my reflections on family, betrayal, and the possibility of rebuilding broken relationships. When it was shown to his students, he later told me, it sparked intense discussions about family obligations, elder rights, and the complexities of forgiveness. Several students approached him afterwards to share concerns about situations in their own families. "You may have helped prevent other cases like ours," he told me. "Your willingness to share something so painful created ripples of awareness." As I approached the 2-year mark since that awful confrontation in my kitchen, I find myself reflecting on all that has changed. The house remains my sanctuary, but I no longer feel the need to fiercely defend its boundaries as I once did. Kyle visits regularly now, sometimes bringing students who help with larger yard projects as part of a community service initiative he started. Thomas and Michael and their families gather here for holidays and summer barbecue. The home feels alive again, filled with voices and laughter, not shadowed by underlying threats. Megan, I heard, was divorced again after less than a year of marriage to the Arizona widower. Apparently, he had children who were more protective than Kyle initially had been. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only relief that her pattern had been recognized before she could cause more damage. Kyle never speaks of her, and I don't ask. Some chapters are better left closed. My relationship with Kyle continues to evolve. There are still moments when a shadow crosses his face, shame or regret surfacing unexpectedly. There are still times when I find myself watching him cautiously, old fears flickering briefly back to life. But these moments grow rarer as new memories gradually layer over the painful ones. Last month, on my birthday, he gave me a small wooden box he had crafted himself. Inside was a new key to the front door not to use. He quickly explained, "But as a symbol, I made this to remind us both that threshold is sacred." He said, "I'll never cross it again without explicit permission and respect for whose home this is." I keep the key on my dresser, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as evidence of growth. The most unexpected development has been my own personal renaissance. Defending my home became a catalyst for expanding my world rather than shrinking it. The writing group, the advocacy work, new friendships formed through these activities all have enriched my days in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Robert would be surprised, I think, to see how his quiet, supporting wife has found her voice. Or perhaps he wouldn't be surprised at all. Perhaps that's why he put those protections in place, not just to shield me, but to create space for me to discover my own strength. Last week, a woman approached me after a community workshop on elder rights. "I heard your story from a friend," she said, clutching my hand. "I was being pressured by my nephew to sell my farm, for my own good," he said. "But after hearing what you went through, I got proper legal advice. The farm's in a trust now." She smiled, a flash of the same vindication I'd felt in that courtroom. "He was furious when he found out, said I didn't trust him. I told him, trust is earned, not automatic, even with family." Her words stayed with me for days, a reminder that sharing our stories, however painful, creates ripples that reach shores we may never see. This house, with its creaking floors and sun-dappled rooms, has been the backdrop to my life's greatest joys and deepest sorrows. It has witnessed the raising of children, the loss of my beloved husband, the betrayal by my son, and now, the careful reconstruction of family bonds. Its walls hold our history not just in the photographs on the shelves or the height markers on the kitchen door frame, but in the very air itself. When I walk through the rooms at night, sometimes I imagine I can hear echoes of it all: Robert's deep laugh, the boys' running feet, heated arguments, whispered confidences, tearful Some people have asked why I fought so hard to stay. Wouldn't it have been easier to start fresh somewhere smaller, somewhere without painful memories? But that misses the point entirely. This house isn't just a structure of wood and stone. It's the physical embodiment of the life Robert and I built together. Every scratch on the banister, every worn spot on the kitchen counter tells part of our story. Leaving would have meant surrendering not just property, but the tangible connection to the history we created. Some things are worth fighting for, not because they're perfect or because holding on to them is easy, but because they matter, because they're yours. Thank you for listening to my story today. If you found it meaningful, please leave a comment below telling me what resonated with you. Has something similar happened in your family? How did you handle it? Or are you perhaps facing pressure now and gathering courage to stand your ground? Remember that you're not alone in these challenges. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience. And remember to hit that like button if this helped you in any way. This is Evelyn, speaking to you from the porch swing Robert built with his own 2 hands, reminding you that sometimes the greatest strength is simply saying no to those who try to diminish you on. Sometimes the greatest healing comes from offering a careful, measured yes to those truly seeking redemption.